right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome my listeners in the United States and all around the world. I am Vince Rocco, and this is Talking New York Real Estate. At this hour, affordable housing ensures that individuals and families have access to safe, decent, and affordable homes, regardless of their income level. It is essential for creating inclusive communities and reducing homelessness. Affordable housing plays a significant role in promoting social and economic stability. It provides a foundation for individuals and families to thrive. This can lead to improved educational outcomes, better health, and increased economic opportunities. Adequate housing is recognized as a fundamental human right. Governments have a responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to affordable and decent housing, regardless of their socioeconomic background. One of the biggest challenges, though, in affordable housing is the imbalance between supply and demand. The growing population, urbanization, and rising cost of construction contribute to the shortage of affordable housing options. We're going to have all of that and so much more with the experts here today as Talking New York Real Estate gets underway on this Tuesday morning. And in the news this morning, properties in flood zones sold less frequently and saw lower prices in 2023 compared to 2012 in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, and in Queens. This all according to a new report from Property Shark. Brooklyn saw the greatest disparity in pricing. The median sale price for apartments sold outside of flood zones in the borough jumped 74% to $800,000 in the last 11 years, while apartments in areas of risk of flooding rose only 16% to $610,000. The stark difference in pricing could indicate that buyers are less interested in properties at risk of extreme weather events like flooding, expected to grow worse in the future due to climate change. In defiance of the law of physics, what goes up rarely comes down, at least when you are talking about New York City rental market. New York City rents for new leases have been on a tear since 2022, rising to new record highs practically every month, and now those rents have stopped rising in part because of an influx of new listings and because far fewer new leases are being signed. Taken together, they reveal that renters are staying put, at least at renewal time. Jonathan Miller, president and CEO of appraisal firm Miller Samuel, said, "We're out of rocket ship mode, but that doesn't mean that rents are going to become much more affordable. The outlook for the rest of the year is still rents to move sideways, but certainly no major correction on the horizon." And Manhattan's first Wegmans grocery store has finally opened its doors, located at 770 Broadway in the East Village. The Wegmans Astor Place offers the grocer's signature affordable price and prepared food options, as well as a next-door restaurant, a 94-seat restaurant with a sushi bar and a champagne oyster bar, which is expected to open during the first half of 2024. The grocery store, which replaced Kmart, is open from 7 in the morning until 11 at night. And New York City will build more than 40 miles of new greenways in the outer boroughs. Mayor Adams announced last Thursday that the city would fill the gaps in the existing greenway network with protected bike lanes and pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, bringing the citywide total of greenway corridors to 60 miles. I am not a fan of this, and my 2 cents says that we don't need another reason for unreasonable and ridiculous traffic in our city. Stop this nonsense. This is not a park. Everyone's social media feeds has been flooded with startling images and videos of Paris streets filled with discarded mattresses amid a citywide bedbug infestation. New York City is no stranger to bedbugs, which faced a major outbreak a decade ago and currently ranks number two on this year's top 50 bedbug cities list. And now with reports that the infestation could spread throughout Europe and land in the Big Apple, apartment dwellers should know the best way to deal with these insects, from how to prevent an infestation to what to do should you find them. We'll have more on that in the future as necessary. And finally, nothing says summer in the Northeast like sitting by the water with a fresh seafood dish and a cold drink, a martini for me. Lobster rolls, oysters, and steamers on the coast probably conjure up images of weekends in the Hamptons, Cape Cod, or Maine, but there are some hidden gems right here in New York City that will make you feel like you are on a summer getaway, and you don't even have to battle the weekend traffic. Here are 4 spots to check out while summer goes away until next year in Brooklyn. Brooklyn Crab, in Hell's Kitchen, North River Lobster Companies, again in Brooklyn, Red Hook Lobster Pound, and Nick's Lobster House in Mill Basin, Brooklyn. Okay, everybody. I want to tell you who's with me today. Marc Norman, who's the Associate Dean of NYU Schack Institute of Real Estate, James Nelson, Principal and Head of Tri-State Investment Sales at Evers & Young, and my co-host today, Jared Antin, Managing Director, Elegran Forbes Global Properties. Marc, after an extensive, a little bit about Marc. After an extensive nationwide search last summer, NYU School of Professional Studies announced the appointment of you as Associate Dean of the Schack Institute of Real Estate, a renowned urban planner and a veteran in the field community of development and finance. You will focus the Schack Institute on educating the next generation of diverse leaders in real estate. Your focus includes urban development in New York City, across the U.S., and around the globe. I want to know a little bit about that. That's very interesting. Taking on critical issues, including housing, economic development and design, sustainability, and property technology. He is also building upon the Institute's stellar reputation in the fields of commercial, real estate, and construction management. So you bring a wealth of experience to Schack, as well as a fresh perspective that focuses on emerging sectors. So before we get into the topic of hand today, affordable housing, I want to ask you about your career, most especially your rise to Associate Dean of the Schack Institute, a very prestigious school here in New York City for real estate and other things. Tell us who you are and how you got there.
It's a roller coaster. So I'm a Californian, moved to New York in '95, and it's relevant to this affordable housing topic we're talking about because I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know it was an industry. And one of my professors was a developer, started working for him, and got into affordable housing. You have to figure out how to finance it. So when I moved to New York in the 90s, it was working for financial institutions that funded affordable housing. I also wanted to make sure that students knew that that was a career path, rewarding both financially but also socially. So I started adjunct teaching, and one thing led to another. I became an academic. And here I am at Schack. Before that, I was at University of Michigan running real estate programs there.
Cool school, too. As I said in the opening, your focus includes urban development in New York City, across the U.S., and around the globe. Okay, that sounds like an awful lot to take on. Okay, yeah. Tell us about that. That's a huge responsibility, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we all think New York is the center of the world. And
correct.
It is.
Well, it is, sort of.
But
in its good days.
we can learn lessons from all over the place. And so for me, my career had been New York City, affordable housing, economic development. But I wanted to know what was going on around the world, what the innovation was. So probably around 10 years ago, I did a show here at the Center for Architecture called Designing Affordability. And I looked at 25 examples of how we make housing more affordable, more accessible around the world. So it was countries from Korea, Japan, Australia, France, Germany, Cairo, and it really opened my eyes, and those relationships started a path of me working with people on sort of innovation in affordable housing, in finance, and construction, and design. So I wouldn't say I'm like the global expert, but it has been eye-opening, understanding how different parts of the world, tackle this crisis.
Talk a little bit about design, sustainability, and property technology. I mean, these are big buzzwords today around the globe, but here in New York City especially, and not only for affordable housing type conversations, but when you talk about design, sustainability, and property technology, what are you really talking about? What are you referring to?
Yeah. I mean, in that realm. In the realm of affordability specifically, there's a problem, right? Which is, let's say it costs, $800 a month per unit to operate a building. So that means your rent has to be, you got debt, you want to pay back your investors. So let's say you're at like $2,000. Let's say you can charge $2,600. That's not really affordable. So like, what are the levers?
That magic cap rate has to always be.
It has to work
where it has to be.
It
right?
has to be where it has to be.
Sure.
And I think that's an important thing even to define on here, right? So we're talking about affordable housing, but what is even affordable, right? Yeah. Affordable to who, at what level, with what sort of then expense rate. And we run, in New York City, of course, with an incredibly high operating cost. So, Marc, I'm curious, without taking us, down a rabbit hole, because we can have a whole show on this, but just a short answer based upon what Vince asked before. How do you see New York stacking up, in terms of the affordable housing? How are we doing compared to the other cities that you mentioned around the world?
Yeah. We're not doing so well. But, that said, actually almost every place has an affordable housing crisis. I mean, that's new. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that, about, supply chain, about incomes not keeping pace with inflation, things like that. But we also have very specific ways of measuring what's affordable. So the notion is generally you shouldn't pay more than 30% of your income for rent.
Housing, correct.
Or for housing. And in New York City, the majority of people in this city are rent burdened, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income for rent. And so affordable, frankly, you can make $175,000, but if the average rent in Manhattan is $6,000, you need affordable housing. You need housing that's affordable to match your income. So we have a problem there.
And when you want to talk about inflation on top of our housing cost, right now you're talking about inflation, price of food, price of gas. I mean, you go to the grocery store today, a little white bag, you're walking out $65 worth. I have to wonder, on the affordable housing conversation, so how does that really affect what we can do to make housing more affordable here? Because we have all of these other components, all of these other elements out there that affect one's income and one's livelihood, right? Yeah. What do we do with that?
Yeah. So maybe this segues back to the prop tech. So if you can reduce some of those costs, like energy efficiency, right? If I can get your heating and cooling bill down 30%, that's more money you could spend for groceries or for rent or for something else, right? And so there are a lot of companies now looking at ways to make buildings more efficient. There's legislation that's trying to, reduce the carbon footprint of our buildings, which is an environmental thing, but it's like if you can get those costs down, then you can also then reduce the housing cost burden. There are companies working on that. There are companies working on technology. So, I love a super, but, if a building has, 3 supers and somebody working on the boiler and something else, but you can move to technology that can monitor that remotely, that can control the heat, so that it's efficient, or, restrict the water use. You're also lowering the cost.
Let's talk a little bit about legislation, as you brought it up before. So, our governor, our mayor, everybody our city, council, everybody has grand plans or grand, conversations with regard to how we should tackle the affordable housing program. Now, I'm in real estate for 21 years, and James can chime in on this as well. I have seen and heard so much about all of these wonderful programs and plans, but yet, as a resident of New York City for many, many, many years, I don't really see any progress. It seems like whenever anything gets up to the legislature, whether it's city council, whether it's the mayor's office, whether it's the governor's office, whether it's the federal government, I don't care where it goes, it tends to get stopped for some reason. In your opinion, what is that about? Why can't we put, grand plans in place and work towards those goals of providing the housing that's necessary? And we're going to talk a little bit about building conversions down the road, because everybody says, well, there's not a lot of land, you can't be building this or that. Okay, well, we could be converting, maybe, and we'll talk about that. But in your opinion, though, why is legislation always like, the roadblock here? Yeah. We can't seem to get past these guys and gals.
Should we talk about NIMBYism now?
Listen, your opinion, it makes a difference. I don't have an opinion because I get confused as to why I keep hearing, we want to do this, but yet we aren't doing this. And we want to build this, but yet we're not building this. So what are we doing about it?
Yeah. I'd say NIMBYs, first and foremost, not in my backyard. Or not in other people's backyard either. And so the governor's like 0 for 0 last year on the housing legislation.
Right.
And it's mostly the suburban and upstate lawmakers that were like, no, we don't want that. Because what it would have done is more housing production, right? So most of the state, most of our suburban communities are single family. Some of that legislation would have allowed additional units in single family neighborhoods. So if you already have the house, you're like, do I want more neighbors? Do I want more density? Do I want more traffic? And all of a sudden, it's like you might love the notion of affordable housing, but when it comes next door, you're like, nah, I think maybe it should happen someplace else.
And the state has been trying to force this down, notably in Westchester and some of the other suburban communities, as you mentioned. And they're getting a ton of pushback. Where I live up in Westchester, I'm actually on my town's planning board, and we had approved in the last 6 months, a handful of different affordable housing projects and units and things like that. But they some experience some pushback from neighbors thinking more traffic and things like that. So there's definitely some, founded concern, but there's also a lot of unfounded concern. And, not in my backyard, comes up again and again. You can also point to California with all the ADUs and, having those accessory dwellings and what that's done to change a neighborhood, good or bad. Something has to be done to be able to create, more affordable housing. The question is, we constantly get in the logjam. I mean, look what's going on in the House right now trying to elect the speaker, right? So what we would think should be some of the simplest foundations of our government, we're certainly getting stuck in traps that arguably have nothing to do with the issue.
That's sort of where I was coming from. Thank you, Jared, because it seems like, we all say that it's an important issue. We all think that it's something that needs to happen. But yet, do we really believe that? I'm not quite sure we do. Do we really have the focus on affordable housing that we should? Is it as important to people as it should be? I'm not so sure. James, let me ask you, you recently said that eager investors will be delighted to discover the tremendous opportunities awaiting them in New York City in this upcoming year. Now, I'm assuming you mean that on the commercial side. Why do you believe that there will be more attractive buy, and we're going to get to the affordable piece in a minute, but why do you think it's more attractive these days? I think you said since 2009. Right. What's driving that comment?
So Vince, thanks. First of all, got to say, I love the new studio. I feel like I'm in the big leagues now. I'm having podcast envy because I tell you, my studio does not even hold a candle to this, but this is a really important conversation. If you don't mind, if I could just add on to some thoughts about this unfortunate standstill in Albany. So yes, we have an affordability crisis here in New York. So our mayor in the Moonshot Plan says we need 500,000 new units. Yeah. Rebney said 530,000 units, okay? And so this is a very challenging environment to finance and get these deals built. So I think part of these are very complex issues, and so when our elected officials are trying to do the right thing and they're trying to preserve affordable housing, sometimes it doesn't actually work in practice. So one of the programs that I'm sure you've seen on either the rental or the condo side is the 421A program. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a program that expired almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And unfortunately, as soon as that program expired, we saw land sales drop by 75%. And I can tell you that developers are pencils down right now on new rental development without a tax abatement. So what we're seeing right now is really the barbell, where we're either seeing condo development, if you can actually get it financed or get the equity for it, or fully affordable, which I'm sure Marc would tell me the waiting list to try to get subsidy for that is, I spoke with one affordable developer last week who said it's a 5 to 7 year wait, okay? So what do we do with this section, the market rate, the middle income? And I think a lot of the criticism that the previous 421A program had was the bulk of the affordable units were built under 130% of AMI. Okay, what does that mean? That's a family that makes around $100,000. Those are rents that are in the mid to high $2,000 a month. And you might say, that's not affordable enough. So I think that the challenge is, and the governor did propose a revision of 421A, the 485W, where increased levels of affordability. But then what happens, because when the developers build that, they essentially have to subsidize those units because they're not turning a profit. So what that does is that would really push downward pressure on pricing. And then guess what? No one sells and no one builds. So we're kind of unfortunately stuck in this space. And the big issue right now, the holdup in Albany, is because our governor said, look, we need a new 421A plan. We see that new projects are not getting built. But on the flip side, the state Senate and Assembly are saying we need good cause eviction, which some would call universal rent control. So, and the governor has so far said, I'm not going to make that trade. So unfortunately, we're in a situation where no one's building new rental, and we still have this enormous need. So I know that wasn't your question, but I think it's
I
important
like that,
to address.
But while you're on the topic, how real is a new 421A program in New York?
Well,
I mean, it went away a couple of years ago. It actually went
Yeah.
away in 2015 if you didn't have ground broken with new development projects. But how real is it from the perspective that it will come back again?
It has to come back. So what you have to understand is if you build new rental product today, the real estate taxes are as much as a third of the revenue. So when developers are doing the math saying, okay, I've got to pay $200 of buildable for land, and then I'm going to spend $500-$600 to build it. I'm going to be all in for $800 a foot. They're doing the math saying, okay, well, how much can I get for rent? But I have to now, if I don't have an abatement, I have to take a third of that out of the equation for taxes and then add in operating expenses. They're factoring what that's going to be worth, and adding additional pressure is these apartment buildings that used to sell at 4 caps and below now have massive downward pressure on pricing because the interest rate environment. So now cap rates for an apartment building. So I'm probably throwing out too many numbers.
No, you're right. I was going to say interest rates, but you're right.
And to piggyback, so what's happening now is you have the stalemate, right? So rents are going up or rents are staying high because we're actually having population inflow to New York City now, and it's just fundamentally not enough places to house them. So a few things are happening where you're having this divide between those that already own their property and arguably have locked in at a low interest rate that are not going to be moving because why trade a sub-3 for an 8% interest rate? Then you have the people that either want to buy, they're now going to have to purchase at a higher interest rate. Prices haven't really gone down. Or you have stubbornly high rents and very little ability to move because of the expense with moving and the fact that there's not much new construction. The other thing that's really important to note is when we say affordable housing, there's many, many different levels. Back to my point about what is affordable. You have low income, but then a lot of what was just described is actually moderate income, right? So when you had these large rental buildings that were built at scale, pretty much any new rental building over 80 or 100 units was built in that 80-20 using that tax abatement. 20% were really moderate income. They weren't really affordable per se. They certainly weren't low income. So you need that as a way to be able to subsidize such developments that may stay rental for a decade when the tax abatement expires. They may convert and be sold condo like we're seeing a lot of in Battery Park City. But you need that incentive. Otherwise, fundamentally, the economics don't make sense. And actually, our politics and everything that's been happening has not been pro-landlord. So if you're a landlord, why build here versus elsewhere without some sort of other incentive to make it worth your while?
Yeah.
All right, good point. We're going to take a break. We'll come right back after this. On the other side, I'm going to ask Jim to give me some information on why this is a good investment year.
Yes.
Don't go anywhere. All right, James. So, again, you recently said that this is the best year to invest, or it looks like it's going to be the best year to invest, in your opinion, since 2009. What about that do you know that the rest of us may not know?
Right. Well, I'm glad you're framing the question in a positive way because when
absolutely.
When BizNow published the story after my interview, the headlines were Nelson says it's the worst market ever since 2009. I said, all right, maybe out of context, but no. Look, there are serious challenges right now with the state of financing, right? And this doesn't mean that every single property is upside down. Yes, it costs a lot more money today to borrow, but what's happening is these loans are coming due and owners who really felt that they had conservative debt on the property, maybe they had 60, 65% loan to value. Now they're it's time to refinance. They're going back to the lender and the lender says, yeah, we'll refinance, but you got to pay the mortgage down to 50% or less because as the rates go up, the debt service coverage ratios are compressing the proceeds. So what happens and why this is going to be, I think, a great opportunity to make purchases that we haven't seen for decades is you're going to see owners who are in a situation where they either do not have the ability to pay down their loan or they don't have the desire. And this isn't just owners who bought in the last 5 years. We're working on a portfolio right now where the family has owned the property for decades and they're in this situation. So this is going to force a lot of sales activity. And again, this isn't going and buying from the bank and loan sales because a lot of these properties have equity left in them. Now, office, that's a whole other story, and we're going to get to that. But I'm talking about multifamily. So I'm bullish about that. I'm also super bullish about retail. I think if you look at where rents from peak to post-COVID, in some cases they dropped down to 15, 20 cents on the dollar. Now we're seeing them ride back up. And I think there's an opportunity to buy retail properties at a higher yield than you would have received before. We're talking 6, 7, 8% returns, where you can buy in now and you can still see the ride up for
But
rents.
what is the future of retail, though? I get that concept, but what is really the future of retail when, just in general, when everything seems to be online, much to my chagrin? I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it all, but what's the deal with that?
So you see that a lot of even the digitally native brands are saying that we need bricks and mortar.
Absolutely.
And because they start thinking about their customer acquisition cost, and they do the math, they find actually having that physical store to acquire new customers, but also not have to deal with all the exchanges and everything that happens online. So, I mean, but if you just walk around the streets of New York, you see they're full. And so what happened was first the rents, look, they had to reset. I think what the retail brands are saying is we're not paying up just to put a flag on a building.
Right.
So it's got to make sense. So, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
To piggyback, they're full in certain spots of the city. It's definitely a flight to quality, and this is going to come up in some of our other topics later on. But good foot traffic, good high density areas are certainly full. I think what you're seeing in retail is also a pivot on how it's used, more to an experience base. Barnes & Nobles is a great example. They made headlines recently about how they've completely redone their stores. They've gone away from a one-size-fit-all approach and taken a local piece. Another great example
That's a good thing.
Is on 42nd Street. There was a retail, it was the Emigrant Savings Bank, then it was a golf store that was short-lived, and now it's the Tiger Woods, T Squared Social, right? It's a sports bar, golf simulator. So you're seeing high traffic, high profile retail space change use to be something that is more experience-based. You're also seeing that in malls and things like that outside the city. So I think you're having this reinvention of, sure, you can buy things online, but again, I've long said that we are now in the experience economy, and it's all about what are you doing with your money to get that experience today.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in Williamsburg, and if you go down North 4th Street in Williamsburg, it's like European Tourist Central. Tourism is back in New York, right? Which I think 3 years ago people wouldn't have said, and it's back in a big way. But that street is like one internet brand after another with a retail footprint, and making it. Well, I don't know if they're making a killing at the store, but like it's the biggest billboard they can possibly have for a global audience, and I see that more and more.
I'm going to ask James about converting commercial buildings, professional buildings, into residential, and the complexities of all that. But what do you think about that? Does that or can that help us on the affordable housing level or not? I mean, it's adding potential housing. We'll get into all the financing of that in a minute, but do you think that that's a quicker way to get to the numbers that we need to produce this housing that's really required?
That's a hard no for me because we actually have examples. Downtown after 9/11, right? Liberty Bonds, we did all those buildings. They're luxury buildings. Right, just the price point at which an office building leases at, the price per square foot, the land cost, it makes sense if the building is configured in the right way for conversion. Those 1920s, 30s skyscrapers are great, right? Like smaller footprints, great views, amazing lobbies, but they're market rate. And so I would say on the one hand, new housing is better because it takes pressure off of the other housing. But if we think about conversions kind of solving a crisis, it's a little bit bespoke, right? Each building is its own complicated process, and the financials really have to work.
James, give us some color on that, because the talk most of this year, and probably starting back last year, is to take some of these buildings. And downtown, Mark referenced downtown, after 9/11, a lot of those buildings converted to residential, high-end condos, et cetera, successfully, if you want to live in the financial district. But from a commercial perspective to affordable housing or just conversion, it's got to be costly. So how do you translate that conversion to an affordable housing scenario?
Sure. Well, first of all, the tax abatement would help. If you remember what happened downtown, there was the 421G, which was the tax abatement program for conversions. But yeah, I mean, you would think that it would be obvious and there would be this massive opportunity. So right now, the availability rate for office space in the city is about 20%. Okay, that's 100 million square feet of available office space. And as I said before, if we need somewhere between 500 to 530,000 new apartments, it would seem obvious. Why don't we just take this office space and turn it to residential? But as Marc mentioned, each building, complicated the way it's built, do the floor plans lay out. That's the big thing. I mean, if the floor plate doesn't lay out, you don't have the proper light and air. It has to be of a certain vintage, right? It has to have the right zoning. So the city and state can change the requirements, and they're trying to make it more flexible to now be able to convert office buildings from the 1970s and 80s, not just the 60s and before. But that still doesn't solve when you have these big, giant floor plates without the light and air. So our office, we have now tracked since COVID over 85 office buildings which have sold in Manhattan, and only 6 of them have been converted to residential. So you would say, okay, if this is so obvious, why are they not getting converted? And the answer is price, right? It is, and as you said, as long as there are buyers for office, speculators who are willing to pay $400, $500 a foot or more, the numbers just do not justify to take a building and the cost to convert. So almost all those conversions have taken place down in the financial district, and all of them sold for under $300 a foot. So if it's cheap enough, you can do what it takes to convert a building to residential, but if not, it just doesn't make sense to do.
But keying off of Marc's point before, not in my neighborhood, okay? So how do these conversions from commercial to residential play out in some of these neighborhoods? If the thought is it's going to be for affordable housing, right? Yes, I get the price. Yes, I get the floor plate. I happen to teach in a building on West 36th Street in my spare time. And I always walk in and I look at these beautiful high lofty ceilings and think, oh, I mean, this would be spectacular. But to your point, James, I look at the rest of the floor and think, well, how would you put this together?
Right.
Most, if not half of that floor doesn't have windows.
Right.
Faces a brick wall, so the light and air, as you point out, is going to be a challenge. But back to the neighborhood, conversation. What do people say if you're going to convert this in my neighborhood? I don't want this here.
Yeah, I would defer to Marc if he's heard more pushback on that. I don't think that has been the issue that has blocked a lot of these conversions. Again, I think it's just the cost and the basis. So. But if you look at the largest residential conversion in the country right now, it's 25 Water Street, and I saw the presentation from GFP. Yeah. And what they did was they took the former AIG office building, which is almost built full on the lot. They're coring out 2 interior courtyards. And when I asked the question, well, is anyone going to rent the interior units? They said, oh yeah, those are going to go first. And I said, why? And it's because they're the lowest price point. Right. They're building them as small studios, right, which are quote unquote affordable. And so I guess, Marc, to your point, the answer is more. The more housing we have will take some of the pressure off. But again, if there's not subsidies and a trade-off for delivering that affordable, and I can't remember if 25 Water has affordable. I think they do have on site. I'm not positive on that. But again, if you want to see more affordability, you have to have the abatements, you have to have that concession to make it worthwhile. These developers are taking on a lot of risk when they go out and build these projects in a very uncertain market. So we have to help them do that.
Yeah. And also Dumbo is another example. So if you look at some of those Dumbo buildings that were converted back in the early 2000s, the other thing is they'll say it's like 1,800 square foot, 1 bedroom, 2 bath. Right, so what are we talking about there? We're talking about a lot of rooms with no windows because we can't call them bedrooms.
Correct.
Right, and so you might get that kind of condition, but that's a story that you're telling, right, to get people to buy what hopefully will be a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, and so part of it is also we have to change the policies, right? So it's like, what constitutes a bedroom? How much light and air do you need?
I wanted to ask you about the policies and regulations. So what do we need to do to change that? Because an 1,800 square foot, unit is more than a one bedroom. Everyone knows that.
Exactly.
So you have 2 rooms that are probably bedrooms without a window, but they are really bedrooms. How do we make those changes?
I mean,
or can we make?
Yeah,
those
there's just a lot of things on the books, whether it be Westchester or New York City or any place else. Like, things got screwed up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. We decided business districts should be business districts,
Right.
and single family should always be single family.
Right.
And even with the conversion, like, you can't convert most buildings that aren't downtown if they were built after the 70s. Like, why? Why is that?
And why can't you mix office and residential?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, if people live, work from home, why not just embrace that, right?
Right.
I mean, my idea for the Garment Center, some of these old Class B and C office buildings, is if you're able to chop those up, you take a 10,000 square foot floor and you just chop them in 4 units and just do kind of white box space. I mean,
Which is
you
the
could
building I
likely
was referring to in the
Yeah.
Garment District. I
right.
mean, you can easily do that for maybe even 5 because the rooms are enormous.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where, the Class B and Class C, the smaller buildings, the loft, the full floors, I mean, that's where we see more of the conversions because, again, there's less loss factor. But what's important to remember is you're going to get these large spaces for the bedroom size, right? When we talk about affordable housing, you very often see efficiently sized apartments. So a 2-bedroom that's 700, 800 square feet, a 1-bedroom that's 650 square feet. What we're looking and what we're seeing from these conversions is, as we talked about, 1,200 square foot studios or 1,200 square foot 1-bedrooms or 1,800 square foot 2-bedrooms. So you're paying for a lot of space you don't necessarily need, and that's in and of itself making it quote-unquote unaffordable then for the definition by which we're trying to solve.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I want to talk about, before the break, I want to talk about the boroughs. What borough tends to lend itself better to affordable housing, or is there one or two in particular, or do all of them lend themselves? In your opinion, Mark?
I mean, if we're talking about, preservation, conversion, new construction, I mean, a lot's been built in the Bronx. We know those, right? Like those images from like Ronald Reagan coming in the in the 80s.
Yeah.
About just how bad it was.
Yeah.
So there was a real impetus to like rebuild those neighborhoods. We have a lot of new construction.
So Sobro
units.
was predominantly affordable. The South Bronx area on the waterfront, was that more affordable than not?
Well, I think you had former industrial, you had, population loss, 50s and 60s, 70s. And so you had the space to build a lot of new housing. So you
Right.
get like thousands of new units in the Bronx, Melrose, South Bronx, et cetera. It's a little bit harder in downtown Brooklyn or in Queens to have that kind of scale.
Right.
But we also have all of the units we need to preserve. So people think about the new units, but that 500,000, one of the reasons it's 500,000 new units we need, so we lose about 100,000 a year.
How realistic, though, is that number? I get stuck on numbers sometimes. 500,000 units. I mean, is this reality?
Yeah. And Mark, how are you, when you say we're losing 100,000 units, do you mean units that are being decontrolled? Because now after 2019, you no longer can do that. Once stabilized, always stabilized, and there's barely
that's another
any
issue.
increases if you can vacate. So we also now have, I've heard estimates between 30 to 50,000 units sitting vacant right now
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if you've had a tenant who's been there for a couple decades, it might cost $100,000 to renovate that apartment. Who's going to do that if you can only raise the rent $84? So,
Especially when you compound
That's
that
a very
with
good point. That's a very good point. Go ahead.
Especially when you compound that with the fact that, as you said before, many of the landlords have had it for generations, and a way that they financed, their life was by constantly refining out and taking out money. So, they can't do it now with the higher interest rates and the lower values. So you're right with the rules about there's no reason to invest it. They're just storing it and warehousing it because it's more financially feasible for them. So
Yeah, I mean, so if we did the math up to 100,000, let's say 30 to 40 are vacant just because landlords are sitting on them because of that math. Our traditional public housing doesn't have enough maintenance budget to fix up units, so they're like 10, 15,000 vacant just in the public housing sector. And then there was just an article in the New York Times about, over the last 40 years, how many brownstones and other small buildings are being converted back to single family from multi-unit. And those add up.
So Mark, I've got to ask you this question because right now our current rent regulation program does not have means testing. So that means if your grandmother had a classic 6 on Central Park and you're the lucky grandson who has taken over that unit, but you're an investment banker and you're pulling down 7 figures a year, you could still be in that unit.
And we all know people who are.
So the point is, I'm probably not going to make a lot of friends by saying this on your podcast. James, why are you blowing the whistle?
No.
But the fact, I mean, if we have, and I think it's roughly 1 million rent-regulated units, but they're not means tested.
No.
If you said, okay, everybody, you're going to have to show proof of income, and you can only stay in a regulated unit if you qualify.
But I thought they did do that. Though.
Only on the way in. They don't recheck.
They don't check every 2 years or every year? Oh.
It's only on the way in. So if they made you recheck every 3 years or 5 years, that would be an easy way to create that turnover.
There used to be a luxury decontrol where if the unit was over $2,500 a month and you could prove that the person made over whatever it was, $175,000, that doesn't even exist anymore. So do you ever see a world where we could reclaim those apartments and only offer them to people who truly need them?
I'm going to say no again.
Come on,
There's
Mark.
another hard no.
I'm going to say a hard no because
That's okay.
You're not going to get elected saying that.
I know, but like a lot of our, I mean, unfortunately, with housing that's affordable, it's a lottery, right? I mean, it's like there's winners and losers. So even with the affordable units, the 80-20 buildings and the other buildings, like if a building, a new building in Manhattan has 20% affordable, you'll get 60,000 applications.
Absolutely.
Right? For
But after
those
you're
units.
in,
Absolutely.
if you then, let's say you means test on the way in, but then you hit it big and in a couple of years you're making 6 figures, shouldn't you pass that apartment off to someone who actually needs it?
You should.
But I wonder if that then creates incentive to not hit it big, so to speak. So then you get into this sort of competing commitments, which we find in many of our tax incentives.
Well, and all of these people, and I'm not going to be so popular either with this company, have houses in the Hamptons, houses in the Catskills, houses in the Poconos, houses in Florida, whatever. May you have to do what you have to do. We're going to take another break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, the specific regulations and the zoning requirements that are needed when converting, commercial space to residential or just in general for affordable housing. What does the city need to do by way of regulations and zoning to get maybe some of these programs off the ground faster, quicker, or at all?
Yeah. I mean, we should probably also just state for the record that the government does not build or manage
Right.
And I think a lot of people think somehow like it's the government that's creating affordable housing, and it's not. It's private developers being incentivized. And so first and foremost, it's like, what are those incentives, right? We talked about losing 421A. We talked about the rent stabilization laws changing.
Right. Well, that's the regulations that need to change completely, but how do we do that?
Yeah, because it has to make financial sense for the developers, for the existing owners. So, I mean, for me, it's like make it a lot more flexible. Like, let's build all kinds of units in all kinds of neighborhoods. We can't do that now, right? Whether it be zoning or the financing programs for the affordable housing, right, are dictating certain things. So, if you have a tower, for example, they want the affordable units mixed within the tower. Well, that's really expensive, right? So how do you get the price down, get different kinds of units, right? We're not all like 4-person households either.
Talk a little bit about the 80-20 rule, because I think we had a little bit of that over the last decade or so, where a lot of these high-rise luxury condominium buildings were built, and in place of a 421A, there was this 80-20 rule where 20% was affordable, 80% was, luxury. Yeah. There was a big concern about that, though. I mean, people would protest about, I don't want to live in the same building as affordable people, and affordable people saying, I don't have the same use of the same amenities as the luxury people, and on and on and on. And that debate went back and forth forever. And I get it, but I don't get it. So where are we with that? I mean, is that still a problem? I'm not aware, and I do a lot of new development stuff, I'm not aware of a lot of that 80-20 stuff happening in newer buildings these days. I mean, am I wrong? Is it happening somewhere?
Well, I mean, it was
Should
overlaid with the 421A.
Right.
So that's the problem. Is
Right.
that like, but also to Jared's point, like it's not affordable. I mean, it's not affordable
It
in the way
isn't.
we think it is.
Right.
It's like
Right.
the incomes are, relatively high. So we say affordable.
It was a break to the developer.
Yeah.
Well,
Pretty much,
there was
right?
5 or 6 different options across the previous 421A program.
Right.
It's just most developers ended up taking option C because there you put aside 30% for quote-unquote affordable units, but those units, again, were at 130% of AMI. So there's other options there to deliver 40, 60, 80% AMI, but if it doesn't pay for developers to do it, you have to give them a bigger subsidy or they're going to go with the option C, right? So, but getting back to your questions about what are things that we could do to promote more development. I'll give you 3 quick ideas, okay? And they're not my ideas. But first of all, Albany should remove the 12 FAR cap, okay? So New York City dictates zoning, but Albany has implemented, it's been on the books for decades, where you cannot build more than 12 times the lot area for residential. But commercial, we see Hudson Yards, you can get up to 33 times, right, with all the bonuses. So why do we have this cap? That might be the NIMBY thing that you're talking about. The other thing is ADUs, and they're talking about this now. I had a guest on my podcast who is made a whole business of building ADUs in San Diego. So he'll buy a 2-family, but then he can add 8 units in the backyard. So it would help. Finally, what we're missing here in the city, it's very difficult to build in a lot of these neighborhoods because there's these giant historic districts, which are really important, and we get it, but those air rights are trapped within those historic districts. Why don't we give liberal treatment where we can shift those air rights? We did it in Midtown East, and that worked, where, the church, Grand Central, you could see air rights being shifted all over a zone. So again, if the answer is more, we need to figure out different ways that we can allow for greater development as opposed to putting caps on it.
And just to compound, right, to echo what Mark and James are talking about. So we said the government doesn't actually build the affordable housing, right? So the government's not putting the shovel in the ground, but they are the ones that have the control to build it vis-a-vis the subsidies, the incentives, the rule changes. So because the developers, again, they're for profit. Right? No matter what you're talking about, no matter what type of asset class, they're for profit. So they need a way for it to work. Without the incentives, what we've been talking about time and time again is it just doesn't work here. Right? So how does the government step in to create a way that makes it feasible, whether it's allowing there to be greater density within it, whether it's because there's some tax incentive that lowers the cost or creates the ability to build the affordable on a location other than where the property is, right? These are all different ways, but the government has to do something to be able to partner with the private sector to create the inventory that the city needs.
Yeah.
Good segue, because I was going to ask, how can we get the private sector to contribute more to this cause based on what they're doing today? And Mark, as an urban planner, not only here in the city, but nationally and globally, what is your biggest frustration point with all of this? Not only this topic, but just urban planning in general.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that we make it very hard to build. We make it very hard to build in New York City. We make it very hard to build in the suburbs. I don't want to let the suburbs off the hook because they're contributing to the problem, right? We aren't getting the affordable units. We aren't getting truly even market rate units in the suburbs in the amount that we need. So New York City needs hundreds of thousands, but when you look at Westchester, Rockland, Orange, Putnam, they're not doing it either. If you look at New Jersey, they've actually changed some of the laws where we're getting lots of new housing in New Jersey and less of the kind of crisis that we have in New York.
Why is that?
I think it's a legislature that actually passes legislation that makes building housing easier. And I think it's also, frankly, like a stick. There was legislation in New Jersey that was it was a court case that basically mandated that every jurisdiction in New Jersey has an affordable housing cap mandate, that they have to build a certain number of units as part of their population. And that's made a big difference.
And there are certain locations that are going to tailor for the affordable housing better than others. It needs to be in a transit-oriented location because, again, the correlation between car ownership versus public transit. So, in Manhattan or in much of New York City, it's not as much of an issue, but they do need to exist along that transit area.
Jared, as an agent and also a manager of agents, a lot of agents at Elegren, do your teams or your people come to you at all with any concerns about affordable housing? I mean, again, it's the buzzword out there. Everybody talks about it. But has it affected the agent level as much as it affects the planners and the commercial gurus and us who talk about it all the time? Does it affect, the feet on the ground yet? The agents, do they see this? Are they getting frustration from their clients on this?
So less directly. Again, it's all relative. So I can tell you that we have plenty of conversation with clients that can't find something "quote unquote" affordable to them.
Right.
So again, the affordable housing arguably was more in the realm of day-to-day agent conversation when it was prevalent in the new development buildings, when these new condos were being built with the 421A and had that incentive. Today, we're sort of in this void where, traditional agents, day to day, this isn't necessarily at the forefront.
How can individual organizations get more involved in advocating for affordable housing, whether it's with local government here in New York City, whether it's with state government, whether it's with federal? And I know federal isn't providing the funds, but, there are ways that maybe groups of individuals can advocate together. What are the best ways for people to do that in the private sector to maybe bring more awareness to the topic and then potentially get more funds for the folks who then want to turn around and build or convert to more affordable housing?
Yeah. I think we all have to go to our community board here in New York. We have to go to city council, and we have to go to the state legislature, because I think you can get really stuck on your one issue. But affordability issue also is a traffic issue, right? Like if the people that work
everything
in a place,
is a traffic issue these days.
But if you have to drive an hour, right, and you're not close to public transportation, right, then you're creating a traffic issue, but it's really an affordability issue, right? And so, to those NIMBY people, to say actually you complain about the traffic, and if we have more density, but you're creating a traffic problem by making everybody live so far from where they work, for example, right? Or just affordability. So it's do people know that somebody at $130,000 a year qualifies for affordable housing? Probably not. If they did, would they change their mind about where they want housing? Probably.
I think we need to change the paradigm. We all want affordable housing. We see the need, right? But there's this whole narrative of, it's just the big greedy developer and, they're only in it for profit. And, these are really complicated issues. So I think what we can do is really provide education. And I think the real estate board in New York does a great job setting up meetings with our elected officials so we can talk through these issues and figure out solutions that actually work. Because if they're just all up in Albany figuring out, okay, we're going to come up with this incentive plan, but it doesn't work, no one's going to do it. I think there was, at one point, they made a plan to convert hotels to fully affordable shelters. And with the incentives and the requirements, no one did it. I don't think there was one hotel done. So they spent all this time trying to figure out a program that didn't work. So again, you need this public-private partnership, but it has to be a conversation. And right now, it seems like that there's too much extremism.
I agree with that, and I'm a big proponent of, and I've said this for years, don't just tell me about the problem, okay? Help me come up with a solution. That applies to just about anything in life. But in this particular case, you're absolutely correct. So what are the solutions to, fix the problem? We have 2 minutes left. Final thoughts. Mark, on the overall affordable housing crisis, issue, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think we actually need to roll up our sleeves and change the legislation. We can kind of take bets on converting hotels or converting office buildings, but the real issue is that we just don't have the legislation and the will in place to actually get new units built.
And today, the hotels, or a lot of them, are filling up with immigrants, which is another whole issue coming into our city that we've never had before. James, final thoughts on the whole topic?
Yeah, again, it goes back to what I was just saying. It truly has to be a public-private partnership. Affordable housing is not going to be provided by the private sector unless if there's some kind of trade-off. And I think that's where there's a lot of issues, too, with what happened in 2019 with this new rent regulation. Private owners are saying, look, you're forcing us to provide affordable housing without any trade-off. Are you going to cap our taxes? Are you going to cap our expenses? So again, just figuring out a way to come up with good policy that works, that really incentivizes. Because again, going back to what saved downtown after 9/11, that 421G, that converted, I think it was 12,000 apartments. So it works if you can put the right incentive in place. But right now, unfortunately, we're at a deadlock.
I agree, and you know, my concern with the local city council, you know, I guess where you want to start things is, you know, we're battling yet again. We kind of had a stay from 2019 on rental commissions, okay? And some banana head on the city council says, well, the person who should pay, you know, the commission to a rental agent is the person who hires that rental agent. I mean, I can go on and on and on. That's going to be another show coming up soon. But if we can't get past that nonsense, how are we possibly going to appeal to them on a much broader issue of affordable housing or how we solve affordable housing? Last minute thoughts, Jared.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to be, how do you make it more affordable? In the high expense, inflation-oriented, high interest rate, it's not getting any easier to do it without the subsidies. The other thing that you can look at, you know, back to how we started, you know, are there modular or different types of construction to lower the cost, increase the energy efficiency, and help us build in areas that may have more available land a bit outside of Manhattan, you know, in the boroughs. But it has to be a conversation. The government needs to provide that financial incentive and assistance to make it feasible.
All right, and on that note, my final thoughts for the week. All right, and my thoughts for the week. The saying goes, if you can make it in New York City, you can make it anywhere, and it holds true for many reasons. New York City is vibrant. It's a fast-paced and diverse city that offers countless opportunities for personnel and professional growth. The competitive nature of the city pushes individuals to work hard, be resourceful, and think creatively. If you can thrive in such a challenging and competitive environment like New York City, it often means you possess the skills, resilience, and adaptation needed to succeed in any place in this world. New York City truly tests your limits and helps you develop the confidence and tenacity required to conquer new challenges. Whether it is in business, the arts, or any other field, overcoming the obstacles in New York City can certainly prepare you to succeed anywhere else in the world. And that's our broadcast for today. Thank you so much for listening. And thanks to my guests, Marc, Jared, and James, for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, or TikTok at Vince Rocco, or my website, thinkvince.com. Eleanor Roosevelt said, if life were predictable, it would cease to be life and be without flavor. And to my listeners all around the world, from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate, thank you again for spending a part of your day with us. I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.